What's up? What's up? What's up, everyone? It's your boy Nick P. You know, the guy with the beard.
And it's your boy Rev Kev, here to inform, engage, and inspire. And if you came to do that, then I guess we preaching to the choir.
And welcome to yet another meeting of the How to Be an Anti-Racist Book Club. I am Nick P., one of your co-facilitators, and
It's your boy Rev Kev, campus pastor for the I Love Jackson State University.
we want to first thank our partners for making this conversation, this vital conversation, possible. That's our housekeeping rules, or just our housekeeping we want to do. First, we want to shout out to St. Luke United Methodist Church, which is my home church, where the Reverend Dr. Luther B. Felder is pastor.
And then we want to shout out Jackson State University Wesley Foundation. And we want to make sure that we shout out my alma mater, Nick P. School, Gammon Theological Seminary, a part of the ITC, the Interdenominational Theological Center, a part of the Atlanta University Center in Atlanta, Georgia.
And in case you don't know what what the AUC is, the Atlanta University Center. It's this big old area, physical area that we are located in, where the illustrious Spelman College, Morehouse College, Clark Atlanta University, Morris Brown College, and also Morehouse School of Medicine and the ITC. We're all in this area called the AUC, and the ITC, the school where I attend, it's a consortium of 5 different constituents, denominational constituents. Gammon is the United Methodist constituent at the ITC. And I'm a current student, and Rev Kev is a graduate. He graduated back in
2014.
that's so you've been out for a minute, so you a seasoned theologian, seasoned theologian. All right, so we want to thank you so much for tuning in. We want you to feel welcome to share your comments. Let us know where you're from. So go ahead and comment. Let us know what city, what school, what church. Put it in the link. Shout out to your family, your pastor, your friends. Invite them. Share this onto your timeline so that we can spread the narrative of anti-racism and the brilliant thoughts and points. It's so weird putting, it feels backwards when you're trying to show something in the camera. But How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. We got to give credit where it's due. But also, we want to partake in this experience, this next moment, this next segment of our book club we call the Sankofa moment. You may be asking, what is Sankofa? Well, my brother has a example for you of what Sankofa looks like. What you're looking at is a bird that is actually walking forward, but it's going back and fetching it, which is your, whether it may be a moment that God showed up in your past, maybe your heritage, your history. But what we're doing, we're using the African principle of Sankofa and going back and reviewing, just quickly doing a flash review of all the chapters that we've gone over in How to Be an Anti-Racist. And my brother Rev Kev is going to take us through chapters 1 through 10.
All right. So for our Sankofa moment, let's start with chapter 1. Chapter 1 dealt with definitions. This is important because it lays the groundwork for how we will look at the concepts in this book and what we will have to go back to if we ever find ourselves wrestling in the chapter. The definitions that jump out in this chapter are what is a racist and an anti-racist. A racist is one who is supporting a racist policy through their actions or inactions or expressing a racist idea. We're going to need to remember this, people. Anti-racist is one who is supporting an anti-racist policy through their actions or expressing an anti-racist idea. Chapter 2 deals with dual consciousness. This is borrowed from W.E.B. Du Bois's concept of double consciousness. He breaks down this chapter into three different ways. You have the assimilationist, which is more of the progressive racist, one who is expressing their racist ideas that a racial group is culturally more advanced than the other in such a way that the oppression stops if they just adopt their culture. Then you have the segregationist, which is considered more of there is a superior racial group and then there's an inferior racial group. There's no in between. There's the superior and inferior. And then you have the anti-racist who sees and values all the cultures as equal and valid. Then you have chapter 3, which deals with power.
Wonder working power.
So chapter 3 deals with power and race, and it talks about how race is constructed of a lot of different things in society which merge together to give one group power and keep one group from not having as much access or power. Chapter 4 deals with biology. How is somebody made up, like their physical makeup, and how does this shape or play out in this concept and this social reality of racism? Then number 5 dealt with ethnicity and racism of manifesting itself through ethnicity as a powerful collection of racist policies that lead to inequity between racial groups. And so this chapter 5 dealt with ethnicity. Chapter 6 dealt with the body. Chapter 6 dealt with the body. And then it says a bodily racist is one who is perceiving certain racial bodies as more animalistic or violent than others. Chapter 6 dealt with the body. Chapter 7 dealt with culture. And a cultural racist was one who was creating a cultural standard and imposing a cultural hierarchy among racial groups. Chapter 7, that's going to be something that we probably touch back on a little bit later, but cultural racist. Chapter 8 dealt with behavior. And a behavioral racist was one who is making individuals responsible for the perceived behaviors of a racial group, or making racial group responsible for the behaviors of an individual. And then an anti-racist or behavioral racist would be somebody who is doing the opposite of that. Chapter 9 dealt with colors, 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 colors. And we talked about a powerful collection of racist policies that lead to inadequacies between light people and dark people. And then these supported racist ideas about light and dark. And then chapter 10 took us to whiteness. Whiteness. And how he defines whiteness was anti-white racist is one who is classifying white people or classifying people of European descent as biologically, culturally, or behaviorally inferior to an entire and other, or saying that white people
Conflating them all
yeah,
too.
conflating the entire race of white people with racist power. And so this was what chapter 10 dealt with, whiteness, which leads us into chapter 11, blackness.
And I love this chapter because Ibram X. Kendi says so brilliantly a position that I felt and didn't know how to say. Um, but he really lays it out with such a scholarly, such a vivid explanation that you can't even argue with it. It's like you can't even argue with it. But really this chapter, every Black person out there needs to really dissect this chapter. um it is really convicting, and You know how we go. I'm just going to give an intro and then we're going to dive right in. There's no such thing as interrupting. So if you're out there, you have a comment, we're going to read it. My brother Rev Kev, we're going to all just jump in and just converse. But what this chapter talks about is he starts out with the definition of powerless defense. So listen, you got to listen closely because it caught me off guard at first when I read it. But the illusory, am I saying that right? Illusory, it's like the illusion, but the illusion concealing disempowering and racist idea. The illusory, I guess that's how you say it. The illusory concealing
Illusory.
Illusory disempowering, and that's, I had to ask the theologian, disempowering and racist idea that Black people can't be racist because Black people don't have power. Now that's a claim that we hear, especially in the academy. And he is actually offering a counterclaim to that, but not in a way that you would expect. So we tend to kind of look at an oppressive construct and say, no, Black people can't be racist because there's this oppressive construct that's always against us. But what he is looking at, what he's offering is that actually it strips Black people from the power, that we actually do have the power to perpetuate racist ideas and policies ourselves. And he starts out with something that's very similar to something that I experienced. And he talks about when he was in an internship, I believe in college, a college internship. And he wrote an article. And in this article, he really kind of he talks about the article in a previous chapter. It's the same article that he talked about in the previous chapter, right? It's the same one. I think. Yeah. And in this article, he really kind of just talks about his feelings about racism and race and things like that. And he does not really hold back. And the editor, someone named Meisel Stewart, I think that's how you pronounce it. He asks him, well, he tells him that if he doesn't pull that article back or remove the article, then he will be threatened with this internship, being fired from the internship that he needed to graduate. When I was a media studies, mass communications, television, film, and radio emphasis student, I had to have an internship too. So I understand the pressure that he experienced. And basically what he was talking about that day was he was using the word them N-word. We the church on here, so we're not gonna say it like we was in the barbershop, but he says them N-words. That's what the editor says when he talks about Black people and N-words. And that's a common narrative that we hear amongst people of color, amongst each other, in the sense of not just the N-word, but we make a hierarchy where some people say, I love Black people, but I don't like N-words. And so we create this distinction. Hello, gentlemen. What's the name of the book? Good question. It is How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. It's an amazing book. And we're actually on chapter 11. And you can rewind the video when we get finished and we do a quick, a quick run through of all the chapters and what we call a Sankofa moment. Thank you for that, Latanya. So we're talking about the N-words thing and not just how we use it, just say, in an endearing, whatever that means, an endearing way. But when we create this hierarchy, when we say, I love Black people, but I can't stand N-words. And what he's talking about, what he is exposing, is how we separate ourselves from these other people that we blame for their condition or their experience or whatever these preconceived notions that we have about poor Black people, or Black people who are loud, or Black people who behave a certain way. We remove ourselves from them, and we're calling them N-words. One experience that I had, I was in an internship as well, and this this particular person told me, was a supervisor, and in my internship it was a casual. I was told I could dress casual when I first got there, and when I go, I usually wear t-shirts or dashikis. I was a lot heavier then, so that was another reason why I wear just t-shirts and dashikis, because it was easy and comfortable. So one day, my supervisor, before we were doing what I'm there for, right before we getting up and doing that, my supervisor pulls me back into his office and he says, "Hey Nick, I see that you're doing your African heritage thing. And that's fine, but we don't want too many Black people to come here. You're attracting Black people, which is great, but we don't want too many Black people to come here because we don't want white people to feel like they're losing control." And first of all, when he said, "I see you doing your African heritage thing," that did what we do when we say those N words. Because this man looked like me talking about your African heritage. So what he was doing was he was saying, "Well, what I want you to do is I want you to wear shirt and tie or polo. There's nothing wrong with that. But what we're doing is we take certain Western constructs and Western traditions and we place them up here. That's what civilized Black people do. And then we take our own heritage or things that are true to self and we place it down here." And and even if it's how certain people behave in their particular context, because that's how they feel comfortable, we tend to make a hierarchy and place civilized, what we're calling civilized, on a hierarchy, and everyone else, we separate ourselves from them and call them N words, which is a narrative that he got from one of the, I guess, beloved comedians, Chris Rock.
Chris Rock. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That was a stand-up show that he said the same thing. He was like, "I love Black people, but I don't like N-word." I almost said it. I don't like N-words. And that particular narrative was funny to the people in the room, but actually Chris Rock, he stopped doing that stand-up when he saw, according to Ibram X. Kendi, he said when he saw how white people were
Yeah.
laughing.
He said too many white people were laughing at it.
Yeah. But it basically, the whole premise of what he is offering is, when we say that Black people don't have the power to be racist, we are looking at it to oppress people of privilege, because we don't have the power to oppress people who are already privileged. But what he's saying is what we do have the power to do is continue to oppress other people who are already oppressed by internalizing a lot of those racist policies and essentially doing what, I'm gonna just say it. You seen Django? What is
His
the
name's Steven.
Samuel
Samuel's
Jackson's
character. Yeah, that was
character?
Steven.
Yeah, so doing that, we value a lot of the racist policies or a lot of certain traditions in such a way that perpetuates oppression and policies. We code switch in such a way that it prohibits anti-racist policies and anti-racist language and anti-racist action from actually occurring by simply acquiescing and forcing other people of color to acquiesce or to be oppressed. So we do have the power to be racist, but not just in the way that not in the way that we're thinking. It's in another way. It's a self-destructive form of racism that he is um, offering. What were some reactions that you had? Because I know my brother. You got a lot of wisdom to drop
Yeah,
on us.
so the last chapter on whiteness was it was a tough read in that like I had to kind of like process that thing, even after our talk, like had to talk about it, think about it, pray on it, and ask what were the things that I wrestled with how he's depicting chapter 11 and chapter 10, and then going into chapter 11, like I brought my bias to the table. Like, so since this is a book about being anti-racist, when it came to the chapter on being black, I didn't really know what to expect, but I thought it was going to be like a homage to to blackness or something like that. So actually reading this chapter, this was also a difficult read, and so I liked the chapter in because as Mashakati had told us before, she's
She's
like
our technical director.
she's our technical director. Yes, she said if the author is making you think, then the author and question, then the author is doing the author's job. And so these last two chapters really had me thinking and processing, and it wasn't like I could easily come up with the answer. I can be honest that I did not agree with things in chapter 11 or chapter 10. And the reason why is because I wanted to explore more. In chapter 11, he talked about the racist ideas that he had from an article that he put out. And he talked about how his big influences were Malcolm X, some of the earlier things that Malcolm X did. And like I'm a big fan of Malcolm X, right? And
Mm-hmm.
knowing the story of Malcolm X is like his father was killed by they would call the Black Knights, which would have been like the Michigan version of the Ku Klux Klan.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were a Christian organization. His dad was a pastor. And so like knowing this history and just imagining like the environment that Malcolm X would have grew up in. He said he was a good student until his teacher told him he would never be able to become a lawyer or president. He would have to be a janitor because he was a black. And so how could those ideas shape the ideas that affirmed him but put somebody else down? But this was not about the history of Malcolm X, right? This was about Dr. Kendi putting the standard of what is racist for white and what is racist for black down, and staying true to how we started this thing off with the definitions. And the definition of a racist was somebody who is promoting racist policy by their action or inaction, or expressing a racist idea. And so going back to how he initially stated, like how you said, it's very scholarly, and like if you don't agree with this, at least know the basis of how the author is speaking on this point. And so when he talks about this idea of blackness, and it being this racist idea that blacks can't be racist because blacks don't hold power, like you said, we have heard that. And I like how it starts off that way, but he gets into it in the chapter some too. And he talks about like how in the 60s and things like this was a counter response. This was a counter response by many people, and some of them were academic. This was a counter response to when white people would say, any justice work or anything that you're doing, if it's against us, then it's racist. If it's holding us accountable, it's racist. And so this was the counter response to that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like how in this chapter, he talks about where it comes from, but he still points out the fallacy in it, because many of us might not know where it comes from. But this could also be confused if we don't have this further conversation, right? Because when Black people say that they're not racist and they're using this definition, a lot of times I have observed or experienced that people mean it. So they're talking about the structure, the systematic structure of racism. So they might be talking about like the policies that are in place, and the majority of people are in the policies. But when we talk about racism in Black people, it's like, well, you might not be racist, but you could be prejudiced. You could still have like this idea or this preconceived notion about a group of people or about a person that isn't based in reason, right? And like, so I understood what my definition of it was coming in. And so I had to wrestle with that. And then looking at the authors and realizing the authors doesn't have to be the same as mine, even though he's Black, right? He, because he laid his definitions out clearly, and he's holding like this level of like this standard of wrestling. And so I really appreciated him for doing that. And then also talking about chapter 3 talked about power, and then chapter 7 talked about culture. And there's this hierarchy, right? But then there's this power. And I think that those chapters are important for understanding this chapter, at least for me, because it's like when you get the degrees, when you learn how to navigate society and you can code switch, when you have earned the respect and admiration of others, but can still walk authentically in your truth, a lot of times we can belittle those who haven't got to that point. It's uncouth. We look at people like they're uncouth. And so there's this power dynamic that is always there that says I have more, or I acquire more, or I'm smarter than, so you're less than. And so those are things that we must wrestle with. And I appreciated this chapter for doing it. But I'll pause right there to see what you have to say. But yeah, this chapter, it was a roller coaster of thoughts and a lot of work.
And for me, I actually, so I think for me, I think it's the language. So how he's defining racism. You have to pay attention, because a lot of times we infer. We like to add, even when people define it, we like to add, oh, what they mean is. But he clearly defined racism, and by how he's defining racism, we do have the power to oppress ourselves. But I think because of the cultural usage of racism, um, I would have a different word for when Black people, when we kind of split ourselves into the elite, those who are the
Black
elite.
bourgeoisie.
Right. Or the when we think of the talented 10, like what W.E.B. Du Bois talks about, when we think of those who essentially have aspired and assimilated to what this American dream is in the best way that we can, without, changing our skin color. We have assimilated to such ways that make us a part of the elite class of Black people. Um, I think there should be a different word for that. That's just my opinion, because of how culturally that word is contextualized. Because I, like you, I don't. That I do have the personal belief. I arrive with my view of what racism is, and I don't attach that to people who are systemically oppressed. Because even what he does is he talks about Black people who use even the power that they gain. Like, for example, he talks about there was a particular person who was complicit in the re-election of Bush, a Black man who was complicit in that process. I'm trying to get his name. I'll be looking. Oh, okay. So he said, I kind of go back and forth. They have study guides and things out there that you can pull like particular important points as well too, like as you're reading it. Um, and there's a guy named Blackwell, last name Ken Blackwell, who was Ohio's Black Secretary of State and George W. Bush's Ohio campaign co-chair. And because of his state of what Ibram X. Kendi calls state of the art racist work suppressing black votes for Bush's selection, Blackwell was asked to join Donald Trump's Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity. So there are people who attain power. I've just like Zora Neale Hurston said, "My skin folk ain't always my kinfolk. All my skin folk ain't my kinfolk." I have. There are people who, when I am like talking with them one to one, their narrative may be one way, but when we get into a context where it's open, it's a completely like flipped narrative. It's not even like a silenced or less, I'm just going to choose my words. It's a completely flipped narrative. There are some people who that's that's the way that they rise. Um, and people in such way whose narrative is not necessarily overtly anti-racist, and they are able to assimilate and acquire power and perpetuate systemic racism. I don't view that in the same way, and I do view it as just like what he talks about when he talks about Denmark Vesey and the black man who um, who betrayed him, and thusly Denmark Vesey was hung. The slave owners hung him because he was going to revolt. I do view that as betrayal, but it's not their power that they're wielding. Black people, it's not when they're doing that, it's not their own power that they're wielding. It's the power of an oppressive system that they have harnessed, that they have taken, and often it may be for I don't want to just say self-seeking endeavors, because I think honestly that is a just like what Ibram X. Kendi talks about. There that has been a generational perception, is that you must assimilate, and that's how you survive. And I believe that there are certain people that's their worldview is to assimilate, 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 because that's how you survive. Um, and what they're harnessing is they're borrowing someone else's power to um, to survive. I don't view it as their own power structure, one that they necessarily constructed. It's one that was constructed against them, that they feel that they must harness to survive. So I don't think it's the same as when you have constructed a system of oppression.
That's one of those things, like, so like there's the ideology is like the mindset, or like this is just the way it is, and then hegemony is when we act
Right.
like that mindset. And so sometimes we can act hegemonically in systems that don't benefit us. So we live in a very patriarchal society, and this is just the way it is. Like that, the ideology of it is this is just the way it is. So like there might be women who buy into the ideology, even though it doesn't benefit them, or feel uncomfortable, and to just say, well, you let it happen, so this must be good. It doesn't necessarily speak to, but because even though the actions might be equal in thought, or perpetuation of the process, the equity of why it's happening isn't, and so that it causes us to go deeper. When I think about the prophetic African American voice in this country, especially coming from out of the church, it was or not even the church. Let's go to the hush harbors and the brush harbors when slaves were like worshiping off somewhere else, like to be free. It's like learning the scriptures and learning the policies and things like that. So when you were confronting somebody else, you were flipping the system upside down on its head based off of what you already said. And so like an oppressed group sometimes will, in order to like try to find like these ways of freedom and things like that, I'm going to take your system, use your system, and then I'm going to present it back to you. And then when you are dealing with any type of ism, especially racism, it doesn't make sense, but it does hold power, right? And so you start showing how it doesn't make sense. And then people can easily point out where I know we were saying that you were inferior because the black body is built and the brains are smaller. But now when you can act, you've actually done the research to dispel that. And then you can show me based off of what I was saying that, well, your lips are thinner than mine or this or that. And now you're at the opposite end of the totem pole. Now we can see that how racist it is. And I think what Dr. Kendi is doing in this book, which is stretching everybody, like the black people going to stretch from this, white people going to stretch from this. But what it does is it invites us to create a new paradigm. Like we can't just say that, because a lot of times the counter narratives that we have when it comes to race or liberation stems solely from a place of hurt and oppression, but not a place of power. And so so this was very difficult because some people will have the resources or the space to create a new narrative. And then sometimes you have to be where you be, and you have to navigate through society. And it's like, I might know this, but I still have to know how to navigate through society. So there's this, there's a lot of wrestling. And so the students at Russ College, they talked about faith. And I thought that, and this was what helped me get through this chapter. We had a comparative religion class, and we asked, the question was, so what should faith do? A lot of people in the class were Christian, but not everybody were Christian. And so we were like, as a class, let's come up with what faith should manifest itself as. And this is what the students had to say. I believe your faith should inform and guide us on 3 different levels: individually, communally, and institutionally. Individually, faith should help us grow with God and lead us toward living out our calling. It should cause us to do good and spread positivity. Faith should encourage more faith. Communally, faith should allow us to come together. Faith should allow us to stand together in unity for a common goal. Institutionally, faith should lead us to serve the communities we are located in and extend that service outward towards surrounding areas while charging other institutions to also serve in just, ethical, and practical ways. This is what our faith should be doing. So when I look at this chapter, let's bring it back to Black. We're having this conversation. We're having it in so many different ways, and that's why it's really hard to process. Right? If we're going to talk about justice, what type of justice and how are we breaking down this anti-racism? Because while some are reading this book because they're trying to learn how to be in various circles and break it down, some people are reading this book and they're trying to heal. And those things can happen simultaneously, but it's a lot going on here. So so when we're talking about racism and attacking a system of racism or dismantling racism and the policies, that's a different mindset as the personal aspect, even though they go hand in hand, right? And so now I'm understanding these policies and I'm understanding the history. Communally, I'm understanding the culture of racism. Like, you're gonna lock your doors or clutch your purse when I come by, or you're gonna tell me to dress a certain type of way because it's going to be harder, or I represent the whole race when people like, so culture is its own thing, and we are breaking those things down, right? But then what I find brilliant about this book, or especially these last 2 chapters, there's still this embeddedness that we have to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I might not be responsible and my people have been oppressed,
Mm-hmm.
I can still address systematic racism and still be charged to do the inner work of checking my bias at the door. Before I even get to the healing, let me check my bias at the door. Do I even recognize that I have a bias? What about when oppressed people are oppressing other people? Type of thing. Like we talk about light and dark, but what about when we're talking about a whole nother ethnic group?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so like it doesn't count because the racial hierarchy, I'm not at the top type of thing. And but another reason why this is triggering, or let me just speak for myself, that this could be triggering for me, like if I heard it, is because I hear this rhetoric a lot when it is served to dismiss claims to address race in the first place. And so the last two chapters felt very, oh, we want to make white people happy. We don't want to necessarily talk about this so that you can see that I'm being fair, because a lot of times it has come off like that. Like, in order for me to see you in this, I'm going to put your face on it, but we still have to center the story back this way. And so as I read through these chapters, I had to check my bias and say, okay, I know where this is coming from now. And is the author honestly trying to center this away from doing anti-racist work? And then going back to the definition in chapter 1, that's why it's important that we have those same couple moments. Even if I am not at the top of whatever hierarchy, am I complicit by my inaction or my action for racist policies? Right? Like he gave an example of Ben Carson. And I love Ben Carson, you know what I'm saying? Like he had a book called Gifted. He had a book, not a book, he had a movie called Gifted Hands with Cuba Gooding Jr. And I was like, yo, I was so proud. And then like he gets on the campaign trail, and that's a different Ben Carson than the one that I used to read in the history books. And they were just like, see, I can't even rock with you no more. You know, like I felt a certain type of way. And in this chapter, he also speaks to that, how sometimes, you know, people are allowed to have different thoughts and things like that, but use your discernment, because you might be, well, what did the chapter say? It said racists will use you as an authority if you speak against your own race. So I hear what you're saying, but did you check this person out right fast because they look like you? Like and so when I saw that in this book, it allowed me to sit there and say, okay, so the things that I'm wrestling with are okay. It's okay to, because this work won't always be easy. Checking your bias and knowing what you need to keep and what you need to let go of. And when he gets closer to the end of the chapter, he reverts back and starts remembering that column that he did at FAMU. And he talks about how he felt like he was losing a piece of himself, having to give up that column.
Yeah.
As he grew, he realized that was a piece of him that needed to die. And so as I wrestle with this, it's like, yes, I need to heal. And yes, I'm hurting. And there are some pieces, especially when we do the overwhelming, tiring work of anti-racism, that will need to die.
And that there was something you said about in the context of needing to die. There was something you said a little while ago when you talked about some embeddedness that we have. And I want to offer. I want to put a what they say. Stop right there. Stop right there. What they say in church. Hold on, Doc. Hold on. Stop right there. There's something that a park. I want to park right there. That's what it is. Okay. Park right there. And there's something that you said there that is so powerful. Embedded, when we talk about embedded, so embedded theologies, embedded ideologies. Embedded means those things that we got in Sunday school and grade school and at home as a kid, all those things that were embedded into us, like into our subconscious, into our unconscious, and into our conscious. Those things that are kind of embedded that we bring with us, those worldviews that we feel often sometimes, isn't this what everybody else thinks? Why would you think something different? Those a lot of those things are embedded and we take for granted, um, and a lot of those things we bring with us, and we don't do the work of doing what Ibram X. Kendi does, defining. So
Right.
even if you wrestle here and you have one particular position or another particular position, what these chapters, especially this chapter, has done for me has caused us to really wrestle with how we define a lot of things that we just let just go, but they were embedded. And we just assume we just had these kind of ambiguous definitions or
Yeah.
ambiguous ways of saying, "Oh, I'm not a racist," or "Black people can't be racist," or they become very ambiguous. We didn't have much language for it, and this really helps us to really craft our own language. Like I'm wrestling with the notion of Black people can be racist, because I really want another word for it, because he's helping me to see how I defined that phrase, Black people can't be racist. I've defined that as literally just talking about Black people not being able to oppress privileged, particularly white communities. So therefore, they can't be racist. However, he's saying, well, wait a minute, Black people can perpetuate racist policies.
And
We can, and but what the reason why I see that is different is because when Black people are often doing that, they're perpetuating policies that they didn't create, policies that were created to oppress them, and they feel that they must stand on top of them to survive, to feed their children, um, to prosper in a society that was created against them. So it's a different context when I'm not justifying it by any means. I just do think that there is a difference whenever you feel that you must internalize that to survive, as opposed to believe it to be perpetuate privilege and supremacy.
right.
Because I think there's an existential difference. So
And
I would like a different word for that. But by his definition, you can he can at least he can place them in the same bucket. But at least it at least invites us to develop language beyond just saying I'm a racist or I'm not a racist, or I don't whatever I vote this way because of this. But we're not really we often kind of just take for granted, hey, my parents vote this way, but I really
right.
don't know
Yeah.
why. Like one thing growing up, which I think I was telling myself and didn't realize that I was called a seminary. One thing that I hated to hear when people say, but I mean, I yield to religion being defined in many different ways. I've matured to that. But I didn't, I was, it kind of incited some like that's a weak excuse when people will say, so what denomination are you, or whatever, and they'll be like, well, I'm this particular denomination, and then you may say, okay, what do they kind of believe in that denomination? I don't know, I just go to the church. Well, how can you really say that you're one thing or another if you really don't know how to define what that one thing? How do you know if you are? Or when people say I'm blue or I'm red, and then you ask, what are some of the statutes or what are some of the principles or the policies? I'll be the first one to say I don't know a lot of candidates policies. Like I can't drop like all the policies and things like this, because that's not my interest. Politics isn't, so I'm not an expert at dropping down those things, and that's what I'll say. I don't claim to really be a great representative of any particular party, but I think what we will do is we get so used to taking a side, but
Right.
we
Yeah.
can never define what it means, what the ideologies of whatever that side is. And I think this description, this text is inviting us to say, well, when you say Black people can't be racist, what are you saying? Really give language, really articulate that more, kind of flesh that out. And I appreciate that.
And like, so with the whole policies, because like the definitions kind of like really center on policy with racism in this book and how he defines it. It makes me think about that. Like, so if we talk about looking at a community and being like, well, the people in this community do all of this, so that's why they don't deserve this, right? And then going back, like, and looking at the policies that help shape this racist idea, and the racist idea that continues to fuel it, and then how it can be diffused, or we feel good when we say, but I'm doing charity in that area.
Mm-hmm.
And the work of anti-racism is more than just charity work. And it's more than and it's an ongoing work, just like how you were saying. I don't necessarily agree with this definition, but it invites us into say, like, so I'm rocking with this ideal right here. I understand this, I can understand, but at the same time I feel that it's incomplete. And so let's dive into this, because this is something that I also want to dive into, but this isn't really the focal point of this chapter. And so it asks us to continue to do this work. And out of one of the workbooks, there were questions at the end of the chapter that we could ask ourselves. And one of those questions, people, like, is it true or false? People rarely use racial slurs against their own race in a derogatory way. And if somebody wake up on the wrong side of Jesus, sometimes we might be using those derogatory words, like,
Absolutely.
like
who
that
said
happens.
that? Who said that we don't use derogatory?
But Black people internalize racist ideas from white racist policies. Yeah, that's the workbook.
Yeah.
Yep. That is something that happens. Comedians, and this was because he talked about Chris Rock in this. He said comedians expose ugliness about humanity, consciously or otherwise. And I do think that is, I think that that's a great observation that was made. Comedians make us laugh, but they do it around the humanity or circumstances that are going on. You can think about some deep stuff in laughing ways, but even Chris Rock took it down. Like, he got to check himself, like, okay, this is more than jokes that I'm giving you. And y'all just think that this is laughing and I'm perpetuating now. There was like this whole checking of thyself before the direct thyself.
Right. If it's not true, it's not funny.
Right.
That part of the humor is that we can call truth to it, or it brings memories. We can relate to it.
Yeah, so I really appreciated this chapter for inviting us to think about how are we addressing these things communally and institutionally, but also asking ourselves, how are we doing on the inside? And how are we doing this work? Are we tired when we do this work? Do we need to rest? Are we overwhelmed? Do we need a support system that can hold us accountable? Are we checking our biases at the door? What things do we agree with? What don't we agree with? Are we defining these things that we go along the way? Because we're not saying that you have to agree with everything in this book, but are you recognizing where you are on this journey? The thing that I'll end with is I'm a part of a fraternity, Omega Psi Phi. You see it in the background.
I see it.
And one of the reasons why I joined this fraternity and like tying it into this book, like you have like this idea of cultural racism, and like one person is responsible for the whole group. If you look anything on Black Greeks, you know the stereotypes about omegas. No,
We
we just
do.
at that
We do.
group. And there's all of this talk about why this shouldn't be this and why. But when I looked at the history and when I looked at what the school that I was at, a lot of omegas were there, and there were a lot of good principles that the fraternity had. There were a lot of things that weren't highlighted in that same way. And so I was like, okay, I'm still wrestling with it. But then I thought about my faith. And I looked at how, like, if I was a part of a different group, people could easily just separate me. But I said, I want my faith that is entrenched. It's easy for me to talk about these people when I'm on the other side. But in a sea of purple and gold, you're not going to be able to tell care from any other Q. And I still got to call these people my brother. This is going to make me do some work. This means I'm going to actually have to understand, and I can't just write people off because of the bias or something that I saw. It made me work. It made me a better man. I want my faith to reflect that same type of work. And this book is also asking us to do that same type of work. You can't just write people off, because in the sea of humanity, we all have biases. And even though it's not always equal, we have to do equitable work. We got to put that sweat, that thought equity in, so that we can do the work of being anti-racist.
And one step, you may say, well, how do I do all that? That sounds like, that sounds like this insurmountable mountain. Like, I'm going to be the Buddha after, reading this. But really, you can start from this. So all the beliefs that you have, or ask yourself why. So just ask yourself, even no matter how good or whatever it is, this isn't a critique of those ideologies. I'm just asking you, whatever they are, if you just get like one day in your reflection, just write some of those, even if you are ashamed to say them, whatever those beliefs that you have about yourself, about other people, about other groups, whether it be about men, women, black, brown, white, whatever those beliefs are, if you write those down and then you just ask yourself why, a lot of stuff will begin to unfold and be revealed in that why, because we hardly ever do that. We hardly ever ask what we believe and then why do we believe that. We hardly ever want to do that. I think we may be afraid, or we either may be afraid of the answer, or we don't feel like digging to find the answer. But we want to invite you to continue to read with us, to join us next Thursday, same time, same place. We're going to go into the next chapter, which is chapter 12, which is class. And we hope that you'll be able to join in with us. As my brother Rev Kev highlighted, there's other workbooks out there, and I guess I'm gonna follow your lead, my brother, and we can start highlighting some questions, because I saw that you were highlighting the true and false questions. He was coming from these true and false questions that are in this book, and this book can help you kind of the workbook can help you unpack. Also, if you can't really dissect the chapter like how you want to, like word for word, you can read along with this study guide. Like, they have a study guide that you can read, and it'll help if you want to kind of read just a paragraph, or just a few paragraphs in the book, and read the study guide, and join in the conversation with us. There's so many different options, but we want to invite you to not neglect the work. Even if it's just you just join in with us next Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Ask your friends to join. Ask your church to join. No comment is too rude, to however you feel, wherever your background is. We don't want you to redact your narrative. We want you to come and feel empowered to speak your truth unapologetically, even if it makes me uncomfortable. Speak it. We're all here to heal and learn from one another. But we love you. I'm Nick P.
I'm Rev Kev.
And we want to invite you again next week. Thank you for coming out to the How to Be an Anti-Racist Book Club. Peace.
Peace. Happy Women's History Month.
That's right. Thank you, women, for all you do.